She was a beautiful young woman with a rich boyfriend, willing to take care of her every need.
He lavished her with expensive gifts, everything that a girl could want. Everything seemed to be absolutely perfect between them.
He just fell head over heels in love with her.
But beneath this life of luxury, dark secrets are waiting to be exposed.
At some stage, he realized there was something more going on.
She started using alcohol and drugs in quite large proportions.
There was concern as to whether or not she'd harmed herself. There was concern as to whether she was still alive.
And when an act of betrayal pushes one lover to the brink, detectives find themselves in a race against time.
This wasn't a momentary feeling, it was an orchestrated execution.
On January 12, 2016, at 8:14 p.m., Welsh police receive a panicked phone call from Alexi Butcher, a local woman who says her best friend, 25-year-old Georgina Symonds, has gone missing.
Georgina was meant to pick up her daughter from school, and the alarm bells were raised when she didn't.
It had been 5 hours since Georgina failed to pick up her daughter. Police are dispatched to her home address, a bungalow near Pencoed Castle in Newport, South Wales.
When police arrive, they're met by Alexi, Georgina's boyfriend of 3 years, Peter Morgan, and her mother.
Georgina's friends and family were really concerned because nobody was able to reach her, and yet everything had seemed fine that morning. And Georgina had made plans with Alexi.
The arrangement was that after pickup, the two of them would meet with their children and go on to entertain them at some point in the early evening. What happened was that at the end of the school day, no one came to collect Georgina's daughter.
Georgina's car was still in the driveway, and police find no signs of a break-in.
When the police get to Georgina's and look around the house, it's clear that there hasn't actually been a break-in. But this is really concerning because her friends know that she wouldn't simply disappear.
Georgina Symonds had grown up in the seaside town of Newport, Pembrokeshire.
Newport is a university and cathedral city in the southeast of Wales. Parts of it are very affluent, very nice areas. So it blends town and country.
She came from a modest background. Her parents separated when she was quite young. She had other siblings.
Georgina was very bright, very bubbly, quite ambitious. Her friends described her as one of a kind. She seemed very popular. Mother said she was extremely happy. So certainly as a young person, she was full of life.
She eventually formed a relationship with a man called Peter Dean, with whom she had a young child. Like many relationships, it started well, and then things tailed off. It was described as an on-off relationship.
Since she and Dean had no plans to get married, Georgina took on a series of odd jobs in order to provide for her daughter.
Georgina Symonds was a beautician and I think she worked in a call centre as well.
Thereafter, she moved to become a burlesque dancer, then a stripper, and ultimately an escort.
Georgina's career may have been an unconventional one, but it was also one that brought in a great deal of money for her daughter, and as a committed mother, that was her priority.
But her life would change in 2012, when the 22-year-old escort met a lonely 50-year-old millionaire named Peter Morgan.
Peter was a very successful and very well-known local businessman. He'd diversified from the family farming business, initially into farm buildings, then into property development, and pretty much everything that he touched turned to gold. It's estimated he was worth around about £20 billion.
He comes from a well-respected family based in the Usk Valley in South Wales. He was married for about 20 years. They had 2 daughters of late teenage, early 20s age.
As far as everyone was concerned, they were the perfect family.
But Peter's marriage wasn't as perfect as it appeared to be.
Peter had what he described as a midlife crisis and went a little off the rails. He collected cars. He bought a tank. He collected motorbikes.
He learned that he could find escorts on the internet. There was no strings attached. He would make a small payment, have an arrangement, and then leave.
It was only a matter of time before Peter and Georgina's worlds collided.
Peter was using an escort service, one a month, and met Georgina that way, and he took a shine to her.
Their initial relationship was purely commercial. She providing sexual services, he providing payment for such services.
As their relationship carried on, he became more and more obsessed with her.
Peter's wife eventually found out what he was up to.
On Valentine's Day 2013, she discovered he sent flowers to another woman, and this led to a marriage breakdown, and he separated from his wife.
Peter and Georgina started to spend more time together, not only as a couple, but also with Georgina's daughter. That allowed their relationship to develop.
It's a fairy tale romance between Peter and Georgina. Everything a girl could want, you know. Expensive cars, spa days, helicopter flights from his castle. What more? It's the stuff of a movie.
Peter's financial support also meant Georgina didn't have to worry quite as much about her 5-year-old daughter anymore. He moved them into the bungalow by the castle that he owned, just a few miles down the road from his home.
He allowed her to live rent-free while also paying her between, I think, £7,000 and £10,000 a month for exclusivity.
Peter Morgan would often stay with her as if they were a family unit.
While their relationship was unconventional, it seemed to be the perfect arrangement. In early 2016, Peter and Georgina hit their 3-year anniversary.
Peter felt, undoubtedly, that Georgina was the one. I think he referred to her as his soulmate, and he definitely felt that she was going to be the love of his life.
Now, detectives are struggling to explain her sudden disappearance.
No one relating anything to those officers investigating said they knew where Georgina was.
The police certainly took this seriously and put a team together fairly quickly.
In any missing persons case, the first 24 hours are crucial, and the clock is already ticking. Coming up, a loved one's revelation takes the case in a new direction.
Emotionally, she was in an unstable and difficult place.
He was worried that maybe one day he wouldn't be around and she might just snap and do something really drastic.
Police in Newport, Wales are investigating the disappearance of 25-year-old Georgina Symonds. Georgina's friend Alexi tells police everything seemed fine when they spoke earlier that day.
Alexi described her as being her usual bubbly self.
They'd scheduled a play date between their kids, nothing out of the ordinary there. But when Georgina didn't show up, the school tried to contact her.
A telephone call was made to her mother and also to her friend Alexi to try and ascertain what had happened. As a result of those telephone calls from the school, the whole inquiry as to where Georgina was put in train. And until that point, nobody knew that she was missing.
Alexi obviously was very concerned about where her friend was, so she contacted Peter to see if Georgina was with him.
Peter said that he'd been ringing the phone all morning, trying to get a reply.
Georgina wasn't answering the phone to either of them.
No one has seen Georgina since just before noon, and her mother tells police she's especially concerned because of something Peter told her that morning.
Georgina's mother gets a phone call from a distressed Peter. He claims that he's been at Georgina's bungalow, she's been drinking heavily. Georgina's mother reassures Peter and just suggests that Georgina's having a bad day and suggests giving her a bit of space to get over it.
When they still hadn't heard from Georgina by 5 p.m., Alexi met Peter at the bungalow to look for her.
They searched the cottage to no avail. At that point, there was no sign of Georgina anywhere.
Georgina's vehicle was still in the vicinity of the bungalow. This led those looking for her to believe she had gone somewhere on foot.
They eventually decided that they'd searched enough and that there was no sign of her, so Alexi decided to contact the police at around 8:14 in the evening.
So far, detectives have found no sign of foul play, but they're interested to know more about Georgina's state of mind that morning.
Peter suggests that in recent times, Georgina's been acting very distant towards him and behaving strangely. And essentially, not only has she asked him to leave, she suggested that she wants the relationship to end.
Peter Morgan raised concerns to the police as to whether or not she was mentally stable. This, of course, was contrary to what Alexei Butcher had appreciated, having spoken to her early that morning.
Peter appears really distressed and very concerned, suggesting that whilst everybody else might have thought that Georgina was quite happy, he knew that she was actually very upset.
Peter tells police that when they met, Georgina was a beautiful and vivacious young woman. But over the past year, she'd turned into a completely different person. And the origin of Georgina's strange transformation could be traced to two tragic events.
He tells them that in the past 10 months, Georgina has had some really significant losses, both her father and also the father of her child, and that sent her on a downward spiral.
Things were very, very difficult for her. She started using alcohol and drugs in quite large proportions.
Things may not have been great with Peter Dean, who was the father of Georgina's child, but nonetheless, losing him absolutely broke her heart.
Georgina's use of drink and drugs initially seemed to be a bit of a coping mechanism for what was going on in her life, but that started to spiral, and in particular, her use of cocaine became a real worry for those around her.
It was possible at this stage that Georgina's despair had got the better of her.
In fact, Peter worries that depression might have finally pushed Georgina to kill herself.
Georgina had previously attempted suicide on 2 occasions. She'd taken an overdose, and Peter had taken her to hospital after that.
Both of these situations really worried Peter, so he was keeping a close eye on her. He worried that perhaps one day when he wasn't around, she might snap and do something really drastic. And there was also her little girl to bear in mind.
According to Peter, he'd been by the bungalow that morning, but they'd had an argument, and Georgina had kicked him out. Was it possible she wanted to make sure he didn't stop her this time?
There was real concern as to Georgina's well-being, as to whether or not she'd harmed herself. There was concern as to whether she was still alive.
Peter tells detectives that if Georgina did intend to commit suicide, the woods behind the castle were the most likely place she'd do it.
Peter pointed out a tree that he said Georgina had previously said she would use to hang herself when she was in one of her depressive spells.
Georgina had expressed at times of stress that that's the sort of place she would go if she wanted to harm herself.
As well as the cottage, they also looked in nearby woodland to see if Georgina was there, where he said Georgina had more than once threatened to hang herself from. The search was very much to no avail, no sign of Georgina anywhere.
The search for Georgina Symonds quickly turns into a nationwide manhunt.
Georgina was treated by the police as a high-risk missing person because of her mental state and what Peter and the family had told her.
But when police finally locate her, will she be alive or dead? Coming up, investigators uncover yet another layer to Georgina's troubled past.
In the end, she made a decision, but this led to tragic consequences.
This had an enormous effect on Georgina. Many people wondered if she felt responsible for Peter's death.
Newport, Wales detectives are desperately searching for 25-year-old Georgina Symonds. After speaking to her loved ones, they believe she may be suicidal and are racing to find her before it's too late.
Their thinking was the fact that she was in a state of emotional distress. She had made an attempt on her own life already, and it may have been that this was what they were looking at.
To help locate Georgina, investigators try using the GPS feature on her cell phone.
They discovered that around about noon on that day, the phone had been in the Usk area, which is probably about 20 minutes away from where Georgina lives, but is also where Peter's ex-wife Helen lived.
Now, that threw police a bit of a curve. Because if Georgina was planning to kill herself, why visit Peter's ex-wife?
Peter explains that Georgina had been asking him to sign over ownership of the bungalow where she and her daughter lived. But there was a problem.
The bungalow was in fact owned by a company which Peter Morgan was a director of, together with his estranged wife, so it would have required her consent.
Peter suggested that Georgina might have gone over to his ex's to confront her and to get her to change her mind.
When detectives try to contact Peter's ex-wife, however, they learn she is out of the country.
The idea that Georgina had been to see Helen, that theory fell apart very quickly because Helen was actually on holiday with her children and not at home.
But that was the last place Georgina's phone had been used. So they dig further into her past, hoping to find a lead, starting with her relationship with her deceased ex, Peter Deem.
Peter Deem was described as the love of her life. They had a child together and seemed very happy.
When she decided to become an escort, Peter Deem really struggled with this, and it caused a great many arguments in their relationship, to the point where Georgina suggested maybe they could have an open relationship, but that simply led to more fights.
Georgina's relationship with Deem became even more complicated in August of 2012 when she met Peter Morgan.
Peter Morgan started as a client relationship, but over time it seems that this became more romantic. We're not sure how much Peter Deem knew about that, but certainly her close friends were aware of both of those men.
Amongst her friends, Georgina referred to Poor Pete and Rich Pete.
And when Georgina agreed to be exclusive with Peter Morgan, the situation only got worse.
Pete Deem found that very, very difficult to cope with.
It was clear that Georgina recognised both the men in her life had some very deep feelings towards her, and it became more difficult to have a relationship with both of them.
In August of 2015, Georgina told Peter Morgan that she'd broken up with her ex.
He allowed her to live rent-free in the bungalow that he owned next door to his castle.
However, despite seeing Peter Deem several times in secret, ultimately she made the decision to be with Rich Pete, and we understand that this broke Peter Deem's heart.
In November 2015, Peter Deem hung himself.
Her friends and family worried that she felt responsible for his death, that her choice to be with Peter Morgan had resulted in his suicide. She started taking drugs and drinking heavily, and with her daughter around, Peter felt that he needed to call social services.
Georgina Symonds threatened Peter Morgan and said that she would take her own life if social services took away her daughter.
The story related by Georgina's family and friends seems to support Peter's assumption that she'd made good on her threats. But that's about to change.
So Peter's explaining to detectives how he's constantly trying to get Georgina to stop using. But then, in the middle of his statement, he says something strange.
Peter admitted to police that he took Georgina's phone to stop her contacting anyone to buy drugs.
That immediately raised suspicions for the police because he'd initially told them that she wasn't answering any calls. He then told them that he had her phone. And obviously it's fairly quick to work out why she wasn't answering calls if her phone was in his possession.
He led the police to the phone, which was in the front seat of his car.
That obviously changes the situation a bit, and there are a lot of questions he needs to answer, and none of it looks good.
After Peter handed over the phone, he travelled with police to Maindee police station to continue the investigation.
Detectives want to know why Peter failed to mention the phone in his initial statement.
That's a very strange thing to lie about, especially when the cell phone belongs to the person who's missing.
Peter Morgan's reaction was to shrug and say words to the effect he wanted to give the impression to the others who were concerned for Georgina's welfare that he was making an effort in trying to look for her.
If they weren't suspicious before, then they have to be now. Basically, he's saying that he was just going through the motions while looking for Georgina. And the only reason for that is that he already knows where she is.
The suggestion by Peter Morgan that Georgina had gone to confront his estranged wife was in fact nonsense. because he knew his estranged wife was not in the country at that time, having gone on holiday.
So Georgina had never gone over to his ex-wife's house, so she couldn't have left her phone there. Peter had had her phone the whole time, so it must have been him who'd gone over to his ex-wife's house when she wasn't there. The big question was why?
Coming up, the search for Georgina Symonds finally comes to an end.
This missing persons case turned into a full-on murder investigation.
Detectives have been questioning multimillionaire Peter Morgan in the disappearance of his live-in girlfriend, Georgina Symonds. And his contradictory statements have raised their suspicions.
At the station, the police start to apply pressure.
Even though it was the middle of the night, the police did not stop. They knew Peter knew something more than he was telling them about Georgina's whereabouts.
As the hours rolled on, that became tougher and tougher for him, and there were more and more questions.
So far, Peter isn't talking, but investigators have other sources of information.
While the police were talking to Peter, they were at the same time talking further to Georgina's family and friends and learning more about the relationship between Georgina and Peter.
Those investigations by the police revealed that the relationship between Peter Morgan and Georgina Symonds was not a two-way thing in the way he envisaged.
He was absolutely smitten with Georgina, very much in love. What became clear from talking to Georgina's family and friends was that actually Georgina didn't feel that way at all.
She was only with him for the money. The relationship was very one-sided.
The family sort of spoke about times where she had belittled him in front of them. So it became quite apparent that her affections weren't as strong as his.
For Georgina, her relationship with Peter remained a business transaction. Georgina recognised that Peter was an individual who could look after her financially, and she stretched that relationship as far as she could.
Georgina had confided, particularly in Alexei Butcher, that her relationship with Peter Morgan was not a long-term thing. Her plans were to be elsewhere, to start a new chapter in her life. She was going to get what she could financially in order to support herself and her daughter, and then move on and cast aside Peter Morgan.
And those plans may have included going back to her ex-boyfriend, Peter Dean.
Her extreme reaction to Dean's suicide clearly indicated her feelings for him were a lot stronger than the ones she had for Peter Morgan.
Was that the reason why she kicked Peter out of the bungalow the morning she disappeared?
Georgina Symonds blamed Peter Morgan for her ex-boyfriend Peter Dean's death, wishing that it had been Peter Morgan, not Peter Dean, that had died.
At one point, she actually told a friend, "I love a dead man," which demonstrates the power of her feeling towards Peter Dean.
This was a long way away from being a perfect relationship, and that became the real focus of the investigation.
Armed with this information, detectives turn up the pressure on Peter Morgan. And around 4:45 a.m. on January 13th, nearly 14 hours after Georgina's disappearance, Peter finally cracks.
Peter eventually told the police that he couldn't take it anymore, that he needed to tell them the truth.
He made an unsolicited comment, words to the effect of, "I can't take it. I strangled her this morning. I loved her so much."
Whilst the police knew that Peter was hiding something, his confession was still shocking and unexpected. It appears that the pressure got too much for him.
He didn't think what was going to happen after. He just assumed that she would be accepted, that she was missing, that they'd accept that she'd gone off somewhere and killed herself. So he hadn't thought any further.
The seriousness of what he had done and the scale of what he had done was weighing too much upon him.
Peter's confession changes everything.
Suddenly, this missing persons case had turned into a full-blown murder investigation.
As part of his admission, Peter led police to where he had hidden Georgina's body.
At 6 a.m. on January 13th, detectives arrive at the farmhouse owned by Peter's ex-wife.
Why on earth you'd put the body of your girlfriend into the boot of your car and then drive it to your ex-wife's house is just really odd.
They found Georgina's body hidden behind, I think, a saw or a piece of farming equipment.
The body had been wrapped in black plastic, tied with rope, secured to a pole, and the orange baling twine that Peter had used to strangle Georgina with was still in place around her neck.
It was also unthinkable. I mean, this was meant to be the woman he loved, and yet he just discarded her like a piece of trash.
Investigators also discover another piece of evidence Peter tried to dispose of.
When the package containing Georgina's body was opened, the police noticed that she wasn't wearing any footwear. In the near vicinity, a black plastic bag was found. Contained within it were personal items.
Georgina's handbag, her house keys, her car keys, and some high-heeled boots.
And another item which became of great interest to the police, what looked like a three-way plug adapter.
On closer inspection of the plug, it proved to be actually a listening device, which could be plumbed into a mobile phone.
It seemed Peter had been spying on Georgina, but for what purpose?
That very quickly became the main focus of the investigation.
Coming up, detectives uncover the startling circumstances leading up to Georgina's death.
He felt that there was something duplicitous potentially happening, and he wanted to have first vision of that.
He listened in to Georgina more than 500 times in less than 2 months.
Peter Morgan has just confessed to the murder of his girlfriend, Georgina Symonds. What police don't yet understand is why. They hope a listening device found near her body might help explain his motive.
This plug adapter contained a SIM card and a microphone, so you're able to dial into the listening device. Once you've dialed in, you can hear everything that's going on in that room.
That listening device had been secreted by Peter Morgan into the bungalow at Pencoed Castle, so he was able to hear what was going on with Georgina's private life.
The fact that Peter Morgan was spying on Georgina demonstrated that he wouldn't have been able to trust her, and the police wanted him to explain why.
If investigators were hoping for another confession, however, they were disappointed.
Peter Morgan told the police that he had placed that listening device at Pencoed Bungalow in order that he could monitor her well-being. He said he had real concerns as to whether or not she would harm herself.
He was afraid that her drug abuse was spiraling out of control, and he wanted to monitor any phone calls to her dealers.
But for whatever reason, he goes back to his original story and makes it seem like he has a perfectly good explanation for why he's spying on Georgina. But when police take a look at his contacts, they realize he's lying.
In order to disguise the nefarious use he had for this number, Peter Morgan put the number for the listening device in his phone as Isabel.
Police obtained Peter's cell phone records, which reveal the full extent of his surveillance.
It was established that between November 2015 and early January 2016, Peter Morgan had accessed the listening device no less than 514 times, often spending hours upon end listening to what was going on at Pencoed Bungalow.
Peter undoubtedly heard a lot of stuff that he shouldn't have, including her plans to take his bungalow and to get that signed over to her, and her overall intent to drop him as soon as she got what she wanted.
During the period from the 10th to the 11th of January 2016, Peter Morgan was accessing the Isabel listening device almost full-time.
When confronted with the evidence, Peter finally admits to spying on Georgina. He'd suspected for some time that she was using him, and his fears were confirmed on the 10th when he heard her talking to a friend.
Georgina disclosed firstly that she was going to take Peter Morgan for all she could financially, and that she cared little, if anything at all, for him.
Georgina's plan was to get the bungalow signed over to her. Then once that had happened, she was going to leave Peter.
To Peter, that kind of betrayal was probably bad enough. But then she went on to talk about using extortion to get what she ultimately wanted.
Georgina was also planning to blackmail him to let his family know about his use of escorts in particular, which they had no idea about, and that she would use that to get further monies from him.
Peter was concerned that an intimate video showing him and Georgina engaging in sexual acts would be disclosed to his estranged wife and his daughters. This was in fact a video that Peter Morgan had sent to Georgina himself.
And that was what had finally pushed Peter over the edge.
Had the existence of this video been revealed to the Morgan family, undoubtedly that would have caused great upset and concern to them.
For a well-respected, well-known family, it would have absolutely pulled the rug.
It was important to Peter Morgan that he appeared respectable. When Georgina threatened to blackmail Peter, threatened that respectability, essentially that shifted the power to her. And that was something that Peter was not going to allow to happen.
Peter Morgan made the conscious decision that if he couldn't have Georgina, then no one else could. He made the conscious decision that he was going to kill her.
Peter was very angry about this betrayal and spent the next 2 days brooding about what to do and planning about what to do.
On Peter's phone, investigators find a shopping list he made in the early hours of January 11th, the day before the murder.
He listed things he needed to obtain and items that were all used in Georgina's murder and the disposal of her body.
The list contained 8 items: poly, which is short for polythene, handle, snips, string, and police were able to connect all of those items directly to Georgina's death.
Detectives also obtained closed-circuit camera footage recorded at his ex-wife's home on the day of the murder. It captures Peter's every move.
It showed Peter pulling up in his car, opening up the barn, opening his boot, taking the body out, and taking the body into the barn. The local story is that she'd put the CCTV in after he'd left, so he had no idea that there was CCTV there.
On January 14th, Peter Morgan is arrested and charged with the murder of Georgina Symonds. Coming up, Foundry Chambers prosecutors believe they have an open and shut case.
Everything he did was absolutely meticulous. It was down to the last millimeter.
But will a jury agree?
He was not guilty of murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility.
On November 28, 2016, Peter Morgan's trial begins. He stands accused of strangling 25-year-old escort Georgina Symonds to death 11 months earlier.
The idea of a multimillionaire being involved with escorts for a start is shocking enough. For a multimillionaire to murder an escort and to have all the sort of salacious details of that played out on a national front was incredible.
Although Peter has confessed to the crime, he pleads not guilty.
Peter denied the murder charge. He was claiming it was manslaughter, it was an accident, he'd only ever intended to frighten her.
Foundry Chambers prosecutors don't see it that way. They describe Peter as a man who was so obsessed that when he discovered Georgina was lying to him, he decided to make her pay.
Peter's reaction to what he had heard was one of absolute fury.
The prosecution case from the outset was this was a carefully planned and carefully executed murder. The planning took place over a number of days. Peter Morgan was meticulous in that planning, leaving no stone unturned. It was clearly in his mind and his intention to end Georgina's life, nothing less. Peter Morgan went to confront Georgina at the bungalow in Pencoed Castle. He had 2 mindsets. Either the matter could be resolved and things would be back to the way they were, according to him, or he would end her life.
He arrived just before 10 a.m. Georgina was on the phone to Alexei, making plans for later that day. When she hung up, They got into a heated argument and things escalated quickly.
It started as a disagreement about Peter paying the bills, but then he confronted Georgina about her plans to extort him.
At some stage during the argument, Peter takes the twine out of his pocket and he uses it to strangle Georgina to death. Then he wraps her body in the plastic sheeting and uses the gaffer tape to seal it all up. He uses the pole and ties the whole body and everything to the pole and uses it like a suitcase.
Peter then drove 20 minutes to Beach Hill Farm. He turned off Georgina's cell phone, he hid her body, and then he left.
It became fairly obvious through the police investigation that this was premeditated murder.
The fact that he had just gone laden with everything you need really did push the prosecution.
However, Peter's defense attorneys paint a very different picture for the jury.
Now, they say that Peter wasn't responsible for his actions when he killed Georgina because of diminished responsibility. Now, that's a way of saying, yes, you did it, but because of your state of mind, you didn't know what you were doing.
Peter's defense team claimed that the diminished responsibility was a result of him suffering from a form of Asperger's.
Those with Asperger's characteristically had difficulties with social interaction. They were essentially saying that Peter was incapable of handling his feelings about Georgina's betrayal the way you or I might have.
In order to rely on that defense, Peter Morgan called two medical practitioners, both of whom are very eminent psychiatrists and psychologists.
Those two experts corroborated what Peter's defense said, that Peter had got into this furious rage, didn't know what he was doing, and then when he realized what he'd done, he tried to hide it. That meant that the jury was free to ignore the charge of murder and could find Peter guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter.
In rebuttal, the prosecution calls their own psychiatric expert.
He did not agree with the finding of those two psychiatrists.
He said that mentally, Peter was fully capable of being aware of his own actions that night. And it wasn't a case of manslaughter, it was fully premeditated, and that meant it was murder. Peter Morgan wasn't just calm, he was calculated, and he was clear about his objective. He wanted to murder Georgina because he felt betrayed.
After nearly a month, both sides rest their cases, and on December 21st, the jury renders its verdict.
After considering all the evidence in the case, the jury found Peter Morgan guilty of murder.
Peter Morgan was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years to be served.
The actions of Peter Morgan were calculated, and he committed the act without emotion. Hopefully, this conviction will bring some closure to the family in terms of the criminal justice process.
Georgina Symonds might have thought her relationship with Peter Morgan was a simple transaction. Love for money. But for Peter, it had been all too real. And if he couldn't have her, no one could.
Georgina Symonds had her demons, but she didn't deserve to die.
You've got a little girl who's been left without her father, who killed himself, and a mother who was murdered, and goodness knows what her life is going to be like as she grows up and becomes more aware of what happened to her parents.
Morgan has lost his liberty. His family's good name has been besmirched. Georgina Symonds lost her life, and her family have lost her forever. But ultimately, there are no winners in this case.
He was a beloved professor with a distinguished career.
He was a plant biologist, really doing some interesting work. You could not meet a nicer person.
Until an act of terror turned his university into a battleground.
First thing that went through my mind is, oh no, a student has lost it and is going on a rampage.
The whole world has changed in less than a minute.
And in their search for answers, detectives would uncover a dark history of jealousy and revenge.
It was an ego thing, it was an anger thing, this selfish arrogance, this I'm going to get my way.
It was almost like something from a movie.
February 12, 2010. It's 4 p.m. on a typical Friday afternoon at the Huntsville, Alabama Police Department.
The chief was out of town, and I was doing some paperwork, and we were winding down for the weekend.
Until suddenly, an emergency call puts everyone on high alert.
I did have an arrest that morning, and I had just finished the arrest when I heard the call come out that there was a shooting at the University of Alabama in Huntsville.
The call came from somebody that was in the room. We didn't know the extent of the incident. We didn't know how many people were victims.
Officers from multiple law enforcement agencies immediately converge on the location.
We had the Huntsville Police Department, we had the Sheriff's Department with Madison County, we had the University of Alabama and Huntsville Police Department, we had the FBI, the Alabama State Troopers, all those different agencies responded over there.
We knew when we were dispatched that it was a shooting on the third floor at the Shelby Center.
While paramedics get ready to treat the victims, a SWAT team secures the building and begins a campus-wide search for the shooter.
The most important mission is to go in and stop the threat and get those people medical treatment. But there are a lot of other people in the building. It's close to 200,000 square feet. And we have to clear the building and make sure that there's no other threat in the building.
It was mass chaos. Nobody knew if there was one shooter, multiple shooters.
In a conference room, they find a scene more suited to a battlefield than a place of higher learning.
The chairs had been moved, the tables had been upended. It was chaos inside the room, and of course it was filled with blood.
There were 13 people in that room. You have 3 dead and then 2 extremely seriously injured and then 1 other injured.
The 3 victims are evacuated for treatment. 3 others are already dead. 52-year-old Dr. Gopi Padilla and 2 of his staff, Dr. Adriel Johnson and Dr. Maria Davis.
These were some of the most beloved professors that we had on campus.
Gopi Krishna Padilla was born in Guntur, India.
When he was 25, he moved to the United States to continue his education. He got a doctorate in molecular biology from Louisiana State University.
He was a plant biologist. He was really doing some interesting work.
By 1990, Dr. Padilla's career was taking off. At 33, he'd not only become an assistant professor at Michigan Tech, he was also being scouted by other universities.
In 2002, he accepted an offer at the University of Alabama, Huntsville. It was a big step up for him.
University of Alabama, Huntsville is definitely a science and mathematics university. So a lot of engineering, a lot of technical learning going on there.
Gopi was recruited as a chair to the biological sciences department.
Despite his busy schedule, Dr. Padilla still found time to be a loving husband, father, and supportive mentor to his staff.
He would counsel them on personal issues. You really should take time to be with your family. He was really concerned with their personal lives as well as their professional lives. He was more of a coach to them than he was a boss.
You could not meet a nicer person than Gopi, really.
Not long after his arrival, Dr. Padilla helped start a doctoral program in biology at UAH, collaborating with fellow professors Dr. Adriel Johnson and Dr. Maria Ragland Davis.
Adriel used to send students to do research through our program, and I, over the years, used to talk to them about different things. I had actually talked to Maria quite a bit about her helping teach a class in chemical engineering.
They were well-loved, well-educated people teaching future leaders and future stars of our community and of our nation. I mean, they were just good people.
But their plans for the department would never be realized. Now, all three have been killed in a mass shooting, and police are scrambling to locate the gunman.
The officers form their team and they go in the building to try to locate the threat, to end that threat.
They're trying to get as much information as they can about this person. Who are they? Were they alone? Where are they going? What are they wearing?
Coming up, the survivors name a surprising suspect.
I can't recall another incident anywhere else that's similar. It just never happens like this, and it did.
A shooting at the University of Alabama has left 3 faculty members injured and 3 dead, including the chair of the biology department, Dr. Gopi Padilla. While the survivors are being rushed to the hospital, Huntsville police are conducting a campus-wide search for the gunman.
The assumption when I heard about the shooting was that it was a student who had opened fire, because that's what was happening all over the United States.
Word of the tragedy quickly spreads outside the community.
School shootings are a big deal because they're always shocking and always terrible.
We actually had national news media calling the office because the 911 center was instructed to refer all those calls to the chief's office.
I was just shocked because I knew everybody in that room. I mean, I couldn't believe that this had actually happened.
There were other people in the room that escaped injury, and they did so because of their actions. When they called 911, they actually were able to give a description of her and give her name, Professor Amy Bishop.
Although she was raised in Boston, Massachusetts, Amy's background was somewhat similar to Dr. Padilla.
They're all very smart, very much into academics. Her father was a professor. Her mother was what we would call a city council person. They were affluent in the community.
She had a brother, Seth Bishop, who was about 2 or 3 years younger than she was. They were both into music and quite gifted. She didn't have the social skills, certainly, that her brother had. And so there may have been a little bit of jealousy between the two of them.
Everybody knew the smarts she had. She was a genius. She had a mind like no other.
After high school, Amy attended Northeastern University, where her father taught art. Instead, she decided to major in biology.
She didn't have a lot of friends, but she wound up connecting with a fellow biology major named James Anderson. They dated throughout college and ultimately got married in the summer of 1989.
The thought was that the two of them could never have been successfully married to anybody else, that they sort of completed each other.
As happy as James made her, Amy's ambitions went beyond being a wife and mother.
She grew up with privilege. It was just understood that she's going to go to Harvard and she's going to do certain things.
For Amy, who was just hankering to outdo Seth, when she got into Harvard, that was the grand prize. That was it. Now it could be Dad, Mom, look at me.
By 1993, Amy had not only born 2 children, she'd also completed a PhD in genetics.
You would think someone that accomplished and that driven would be successful immediately, but that didn't turn out to be the case.
They struggled financially. Even though they were both highly educated, neither one of them really could make a living.
Over the next 10 years, Amy went from one low-paying research job to another, while James tried to freelance as a computer engineer.
He was hoping to successfully discover something that would make him the money that they would need to support the family.
They wind up having 2 more children as well. That's 4 mouths to feed, and they still don't have stable careers.
But all that changed in 2003, when Amy was offered a position at the University of Alabama. It was the change she'd been waiting for.
It is a great school for engineering and the sciences, and this is some place that that drew her in. that was good for her and her field of study.
What the university typically does is give you a period of about 6 years to prove to the university that you have the skill sets to teach, to do research, to be able to attract funding from other sources.
Then you apply for tenure. That would mean essentially a permanent position on that faculty. If you've got tenure, you've got nearly a guaranteed job for the foreseeable future.
The couple moved to Huntsville, and while James cared for the children, Amy began her career as associate professor of biology.
James did part-time work, but nothing that was much of substance. She was the breadwinner and living off her salary at UAH.
She really sank her teeth into that position, and it didn't take her long to stand out.
She had designed this automated culturing process, a petri dish as it were. And the idea there is that if you can automate something that is done normally in the lab, you'll get more consistent results. So I thought that was impressive.
Amy's invention brought more than $1 million of funding to the university and seemed to make her tenure a foregone conclusion.
The students were happy with her. It seemed like she was happy to be here. The atmosphere was good.
So what could have caused a successful biologist and mother of 4 children to turn into a cold-blooded killer?
I don't know what would have prompted that. It seemed like she had everything.
Coming up, the hunt for Amy Bishop comes to an unexpected end.
She had the eyes that were real evil looking.
Huntsville police are conducting a campus-wide search for Professor Amy Bishop after witnesses named her as the gunman in a mass shooting that killed 3 of her colleagues.
They have no idea if Amy has fled the scene already or if she intends to hurt herself or anyone else. All police know at that point is she's wearing a pink shirt and jeans, and she's considered armed and dangerous.
Law enforcement agencies have mobilized to handle multiple scenarios, but the manhunt ends almost as quickly as it began.
All the agencies knew a description of the individual. She had come out of the building and she was engaged in a discussion with the deputy. And Officer Torker realized that this person is identical to the description that we have.
She just looked like a normal, middle-aged woman. She didn't look like she'd murdered anybody. She was just walking normally. We had her at gunpoint, and he told her to get down on her knees. She didn't appear distraught or anything like that. I mean, it's just, she asked me what was going on.
She doesn't have a weapon on her or any signs that she was involved in these shootings. But there are multiple eyewitnesses who says she's the one who did it.
I asked her what her name was, and she said Amy Bishop. At that time, I knew that we had the right person. I went ahead and handcuffed her and led her back to my patrol car.
Just 15 minutes after the 911 call, Amy Bishop is in custody.
She immediately began saying, "This didn't happen. I don't know what y'all are talking about. No, they're still alive."
It didn't happen. There's no way. They're still alive.
As the officers take Amy into custody, her husband James arrives. And when they tell him why his wife is being arrested, he seems confused.
He says Amy asked him to pick her up from work, and he has no idea what's going on.
They arrest him too because they weren't sure if he had something to do with this.
We detained them, both of them, separately, and took them down to the precinct to be interviewed.
Amy and James both deny any involvement in the shooting, but a search of the biology building turns up some damning evidence.
Police find a 9mm handgun and a woman's bloody coat stuffed into a garbage can in a restroom on the 2nd floor. And inside the conference room, they find a bag with a 9mm gun clip in it. They run a background search on the gun, and it turns out it's registered to James Anderson. Any doubts you might have had at that point immediately go away.
Amy is charged with 3 counts of murder and attempted murder. It's unclear whether James is an accomplice or just trying to protect his wife, but police have no choice but to let him go.
We all felt like that he knew a whole lot more than what he was letting on, but we just could not, we just couldn't connect him enough to charge him.
James acts like he has no idea why Amy might have done this, and she's refusing to talk. But her colleagues have plenty to say about her.
When we started looking at the background and trying to figure out what the motive was for what she did, it turns out that she had been struggling for a while.
Colleagues tell police that after her early success, Amy seemed to take career advancement for granted, and it wasn't working out well for her.
She had been there a few years. Things were not going the way she wanted them to go as far as her career there.
She wasn't accomplishing maybe what she needed to for tenure, that the mood sort of started to change. She had several papers that were not probably up to par.
They say Amy's attitude wasn't winning her any friends in the department either.
She was extremely arrogant and that she was better than they were in her own eyes, and that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
She would introduce herself as, "I'm Dr. Amy Bishop, Harvard educated." And so that was her defining everything about her, was that she was Harvard educated.
In the spring of 2009, after 6 years at the university, Amy's bid for tenure finally arrived.
She had gone on a kind of a political campaign around her colleagues, trying to basically force them into saying whether or not they were going to support her or not.
She was denied.
If you were denied tenure at not the biggest, best-known school in the country, despite your Harvard degree, you're going to scramble to find the next job.
The fact that she didn't get all the recognition that she probably thought she would get because she's a Harvard grad. I can only imagine the anger, the resentment.
Gopi was prepared to help her also go through the process and whatever she needed as she moved on. He was a really nice fellow.
But Amy refused to accept defeat.
She appealed the decision and spent months trying to get the administration to change their mind.
You can almost feel the pressure in her just building. Nobody's going to treat me this way. Nobody treats Amy Bishop this way, and I'm not going to stand for it.
She had gone to a shooting range and practiced, and she was talking to her students about practicing and how much she enjoyed shooting.
By February of 2010, Amy had received notification that her final appeal had been denied.
For Amy Bishop, the jig was up as far as her continued employment at UAH.
It seems plain that she felt aggrieved, and these are the people who had wronged her.
But if Amy wanted payback, why shoot 6 of her coworkers and leave the others unscathed?
I think she had 8 or 9 rounds still in the magazine.
You have to wonder if she was targeting Dr. Gopi and the others were just in the way. Or maybe she just snapped.
Coming up, investigators discover there is more behind the shooting than a simple act of revenge.
It shakes you when your own teacher is capable of such horrendous acts.
Dr. Amy Bishop has been charged with shooting 6 of her colleagues at the University of Alabama, but police are still left with several questions.
It looks like she's been passed over for a promotion and is now looking to get revenge. But they still don't know what happened.
The best evidence we have are the survivors in the room that were there and present. We had eyewitnesses that saw everything.
Witnesses say that around 3 p.m., the biology department gathered for a staff meeting on the 3rd floor of the Shelby Center.
Instead of having a center table, that particular room had 3 tables set up in a U-shaped form.
There were about a dozen faculty members there, and as the chair of the department, Dr. Padilla was sitting right up front.
They were, as I understand it, discussing the curriculum for the next year, and Dr. Bishop walked in after the meeting had started.
Amy took a seat next to Dr. Gopi. Multiple people mentioned that she had a bag with her and that she kept it on her lap throughout the whole meeting.
I don't think anybody thought anything unusual about that bag. It was just unusual for her to be there.
Faculty members, to a person, said, we were a little surprised when she showed up at the meeting because we knew she was not going to be there the following semester.
They say Amy remained quiet throughout the meeting, giving no reason for anyone to suspect what was about to happen.
She sat there for probably close to an hour. And then during their agenda, they went from one topic to the next, and everybody kind of looked down to see what was going on.
She got up and she pulled out of her bag a 9mm Ruger, and she started shooting.
Doctors Padilla, Johnson, and Davis were her first targets. They all died instantly.
She was just going around the room, just very calmly, like she knew exactly what she was doing.
As she's shooting everyone, it's chaos, as you can imagine, in the room.
A friend of Amy's, Dr. Deborah Moriarty, tells investigators that she tried to stop her.
Dr. Moriarty was across at least two tables away from Amy Bishop. When the shooting started, she was not in her immediate sight, so she ducked under the table.
She was grabbing at Amy's ankles, trying to get her to fall, to stop. And she kept pleading with her. You know my family. I know your family. Don't do this. You don't have to do this.
But instead of listening to Deborah's pleas, Amy tried to kill her too.
Amy Bishop pointed the gun at her point blank and pulled the trigger. Wouldn't fire.
Just click, click, click. The gun was still jammed. She was still pulling the trigger.
She grabs Amy, pushes her out of the room, locks the door, and then everyone else comes and starts barricading the door behind her. It was as heroic an action as you would ever see.
It was all over within about 40 seconds.
Investigators believe that's when Amy decided to make her escape.
She went to the bathroom, washed off the gun, washed her hands from the blood.
She took off her bloody jacket and stuffed it in the trash.
Put the gun into the trash can.
Then she walks out of there like nothing had even happened.
She called her husband and she says, I'm ready to go. Come get me.
But Amy's colleagues tell police her motive couldn't have been as simple as revenge, because the people she shot were the only ones in the department who supported her.
Dr. Padilla, the department chair, and the others actually supported her tenure. They were in the minority of folks who wanted her to get tenure. These gentle, smart people. A lot of them stuck up for her.
That's what's shocking to me, frankly. To turn against the very people who were going to help her was just... I still have a hard time imagining that right now. It's like, why would you do that?
The magazine was fully loaded, so she had 16 rounds in the gun, and then she had another 15 rounds in a magazine in her purse. So she had 31 rounds for 13 people.
Had it not malfunctioned, who knows what would have been like.
When investigators dig a little deeper into Amy's background, what they find is disturbing.
We started uncovering many things in her past that just revealed a violent history.
The first thing they come across is an arrest record from Massachusetts, where Amy was living before she took the job at UAH. In 2002, she went out to breakfast with her family and got into an argument with another mother there who apparently took the last booster seat for her kid.
When Amy came in, she demanded that booster seat. She started cursing at this woman, using a lot of profanity, and she slugs the woman and then starts out the door and hits somebody else on the way out. So the police arrest her.
Amy was charged with assault and battery. She pled guilty and was placed on probation. prosecutors apparently recommended anger management classes.
But that wasn't the only time Amy had resorted to violence.
They come across a report from 1993 when they were still in Chicago. And this time, it's even worse.
Amy was working in a department at Children's Hospital, and she was having trouble getting along with her colleagues.
One of her former professors had given her a bad evaluation, and she had gone and confronted the professor and said, "You better change your evaluation or else." And he said, "I'm sticking by my evaluation."
A few days later, Amy's professor had come home to a mysterious package on his front porch. It turned out to be a pipe bomb.
It didn't go off, thank the Lord, but the interesting thing about the pipe bomb, the powder, the black powder inside of it can only be purchased in one place. They traced it back to one place here in Alabama. So she was a suspect. The evidence was strong enough, but probably not enough to get a conviction in the pipe bombing.
No charges were ever brought against Amy Bishop, but to investigators, a clear pattern is emerging.
This selfish arrogance, this I'm going to get my way, you are not going to interfere with me and my goals and what I want, that certainly was there with her all along.
She was one of those people who just didn't see people as people. They were more objects to be moved around on the chessboard so she could win the game and get what she wanted.
Coming up, a 24-year-old case sheds new light on the mind of a killer.
She got away with it once. Something in her psyche said, doesn't matter, I can pick up a gun again.
I believe that she is as evil a person as I've ever seen.
In the days following her arrest, investigators have discovered that Dr. Amy Bishop has a long history of violence. But one crime in particular stands out, a shooting back in 1986.
When Amy was 21 years old, her brother Seth was shot and killed. Turns out, Amy was the one who shot him.
Her brother was 18 at the time, and by all accounts, he was the star of the family, and really the brighter and better one of the two children.
Everybody loved him, and so there may have been a little bit of jealousy.
According to the statement she gave police at the time, Amy had been left alone in her parents' house after an argument.
The father had fussed at both of the children about leaving their things on the floor. Amy had smarted off to him, and she went off to her room.
Her brother apparently went to go get groceries, and then her mother went to ride horses at the stable. Then her father left as well.
Amy said that she'd been scared because the house was broken into the year before, so she decided to take precautions.
She went and got her father's shotgun, and she loaded it.
And it's a pump shotgun. With a pump shotgun, you actually have to rack that round to get it ready to shoot it.
She claimed that it went off by itself. She laid the shotgun on the bed, she wasn't anywhere near it, and it blew a hole into the wall of her bedroom.
A little while later, Amy's mother and her brother returned home.
She went down into the kitchen carrying the shotgun. She said that she didn't know how to unload it, so that's why she was bringing it to him.
Her brother is standing in the kitchen with her mother, and she's got it leveled at him, and they're talking.
They both said, "Be careful, you're going to shoot somebody." And her brother said, "You need to point it up in the air."
Both Amy and her mother would later tell police that the gun went off accidentally.
The next thing she knows, she cuts him in half right in the kitchen with the shotgun.
Amy's mother immediately calls 911, and her father arrives about the same time the paramedics do. But it's already too late.
There's nothing that can be done for him. It destroyed his heart. And so he bled out.
At the time, Massachusetts police ruled his death a tragic accident. But after the shooting in Alabama, investigators in Massachusetts decide to take a second look at the 1986 shooting report.
None of it really makes any sense when you look at Guns don't go off unless you pull the trigger. You can accidentally pull the trigger and not mean for it to go off, which could explain the first shot. But she racks the round again before she walked downstairs to accidentally pull the trigger again while it's pointed at her brother.
They began to reopen the investigation, and as prosecutors began to dig into that, they found anomalies in how the case was handled.
They also discover some significant details from that day had been mysteriously left out.
It turns out the shooting didn't happen exactly as it was described. After the gun went off, Amy ran out of the house and into the street.
There was a woman driving by. Amy pointed the shotgun at the driver and wanted to commandeer her car. She says, "My husband is trying to kill me. I need to get away," which of course made no sense whatsoever. The woman drove off and called 911.
She runs down to the local Ford dealership where there's a couple of guys working back in the garage, levels the shotgun on them and says, "I need a car."
Officers responding to the 911 call managed to arrest Amy at the car dealership. But once again, no charges were filed.
Why she wasn't charged with the other incidents that happened on that same day, everybody has asked that question since.
All those things are intentional acts, down to racking the round, pulling the trigger, and then taking off and coming up with a story at the Ford dealership. None of it holds water as far as it being an accident.
No matter how she got away with it, Alabama detectives are convinced the shooting gave Amy Bishop a taste for vengeance.
You can see this building over time. She had already killed one person. She could have killed the professor with the pipe bomb. He was just lucky it didn't go off. Amy was a ticking time bomb herself.
Massachusetts police agree. On June 16, 2010, almost 24 years after his death, Amy is indicted for the first-degree murder of Seth Bishop.
People got angry. Why is it that the people that hired her was not aware of this fact?
When she's arrested, she uses the name Anderson, her married name. But when they do the background check on Bishop, they find that she's got a clean slate.
If you've got an amazing credential from an amazing university, you're a woman and a mother, people are much more reluctant to believe you also may be a mass murderer. Unfortunately, our packages sometimes fool us.
Now, Amy Bishop faces 3 murder charges for her colleagues at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, and an additional murder charge for her brother's death in Massachusetts. Coming up, Amy's defense strategy gives prosecutors cause for concern.
She had good lawyers. You knew it was going to be a real fight.
There was probably a big part of her that felt like she would beat this.
Dr. Amy Bishop has been charged with murdering her brother Seth after new evidence was unearthed in the 24-year-old case. But first, she will have to stand trial for the February 2010 killing of 3 of her colleagues at the University of Alabama.
If the proposition is, can we prove she did it? It's as strong as you could ever hope for.
We had eyewitnesses in the room that saw her do the shooting. We recovered the gun. We recovered her bloody clothes at the scene. And then we recovered her leaving the scene. So that in itself, you can't get much stronger than that.
In May of 2011, Alabama's district attorney announces plans to seek the death penalty.
If anyone deserved the death penalty, she did. There's no doubt about it.
At her arraignment, Amy's lawyers reveal their strategy to prevent that from happening.
We figured there'd be a long trial. From the outset, her defense team began to sort of lay the groundwork that something was wrong with her.
Amy pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Her attorneys arguing she wasn't in control of her actions, so she could not be held responsible for the consequences.
Her disturbance was deep, it was profound, it was a disconnection from reality, a disconnection from other people, and it had gone on for a very long time.
Capital murder defendants in Alabama are generally given court-appointed lawyers. Most of them don't have the money to pay for a defense that's going to be elaborate and expensive. She had good lawyers. You knew it was going to be a real fight.
All the while, Amy's husband remains loyal to his wife.
Her husband had been living in that with her for so long, it became in some way normal for him. He didn't think she was crazy because it was his reality.
But prosecutors aren't buying Amy's act.
The thing about a mental defense in our state is you have to be suffering from a severe mental illness, and you have to be suffering so bad that you do not know right from wrong. The pre-planning of I'm going to the shooting range and working on everything, it's hard to say, well, I didn't know right from wrong.
She knew what she was doing. She knew what she did was wrong. She tried to cover it up. She had a plan.
Her trial is scheduled for September 10th, 2012, which gives prosecutors plenty of time to gather additional evidence.
She was held in the jail leading up to the trial of this case, and so there were hours and hours of jail calls, and we listened to a lot of them.
They definitely indicate a woman who is in charge of her faculties.
Make sure you do this with the insurance policy, and you take care of this with the kids. And the person who was just so confused earlier was very much drill sergeant about here's what we do next. A pretty significant contrast.
Their defense would have been dead in the water. We had so much material off those jail phone calls. It was a gold mine.
I think it would have been pretty clear to a jury that she's not legally insane.
But as Amy's trial approaches, the state faces more opposition to the death penalty, this time from the most unlikely place.
We had a meeting with the victims' families, the ones who had lost their loved ones. They came and requested that we not seek the death penalty.
Maybe they decided that she had 4 young children. Maybe that would be too horrible for them as well. They had the compassion.
I got to tell you, I've never encountered that before in my career. There's nobody on the planet who wants the death penalty more than your victim's family. I've never had it any other way until I got to this case.
So instead, the district attorney decides to offer Amy a deal. In exchange for a guilty plea, she'd receive life in prison without the possibility of parole.
She ultimately decided to take the deal, which was not only a good idea as far as she is concerned, but it also gave everyone else closure without having to go through a long and drawn-out trial.
Part of the plea agreement is that you waive all your rights to appeal. And when she pled guilty, she agreed to that.
It was dramatic just because it was sort of the end of the road in this bizarre and tangled and sad case.
Since Amy will be spending the rest of her life in Alabama's Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women, authorities in Massachusetts decide not to prosecute her for the murder of Seth Bishop.
I think the fact that she will never get out of prison is a good thing. I think the punishment seems just.
She deserves every second she spends down at Tutwiler, and I don't think that anybody down there cares that she went to Harvard.
A disturbed woman's need for revenge had destroyed several families, including her own, and robbed a university of some of their best and brightest.
When you lose a huge portion of your entire department in one day, it's hard to come back from. This was a huge loss.
2 of the survivors suffered years of post-traumatic stress, blindness in one eye, and brain injury. Since then, one of the survivors has passed away.
I used to wake up someday and says, this could not have happened, but then it did. I knew all the people there, and it just still doesn't make sense to me.
It's the kind of thing that you can't help but remember, but wish you could forget.
she was a hard-working mother and entrepreneur.
She lived with her mother-in-law and her husband, and she had 5 children.
She was the one who was bringing in all the money, so they were relying on her.
Until a bold new venture put her in the crosshairs of a dangerous enemy.
One of the bullets went into a room that was occupied by a baby.
The panic, the fear, life as you knew it is no longer the same.
But was it the cost of doing business with the wrong people, or a personal vendetta?
Because of the old saying, familiarity breeds contempt. When people want revenge, they usually want it right away.
July 10th, 2006. Around 2:45 a.m., police in Largo, Florida respond to a reported break-in at a business in town.
The owner is a 39-year-old woman named Christina Ladrini. By the time officers arrived, she was waiting for them inside. It looks like some windows of the building had been shattered.
A witness had called it in from a nearby laundromat, and Christina had been immediately notified. But before an investigation even begins, Christina receives more disturbing news.
She's still giving her report to police when the phone rings. It's her husband, and he just said he heard gunshots outside of their house.
As the officer with Christina calls it in, she calls in an employee to supervise the shop so she can go home to her family. Deputies from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department are immediately dispatched to the couple's home.
Christina's family lived about 3 miles away in the neighboring town of Clearwater. When officers got there, they found glass all over the place, and the couple's minivan had been shot up.
No one was injured, but it still had to be very frightening.
Christina Ladrini has 5 children. They range in ages, including an 11-month-old baby. Everybody was freaking out, especially since it's in the middle of the night. It shakes an entire neighborhood.
No one else in the neighborhood appears to have suffered any damage. And since the shooting occurred just an hour after the break-in at Christina's shop, one thought is on everyone's mind.
Either this couple has the worst luck in the world, or someone was targeting them.
To those who knew her, Christina Ladrini was a loving wife and mother, doing everything she could to support her family.
Christina Ladrini was the eldest of 5 kids. In fact, she had 5 kids of her own. She came from a very hard-working family, and she valued family and health over wealth.
Growing up, it seemed like Christina was the typical girl next door. Sweet, well-intentioned, always seeing the best in people, including the man that she eventually fell in love with, Vincent Ladrini.
Vincent was known as kind of a bad boy, but to Christina, he was handsome, he was fun, he was a nice guy.
And after just a few years of marriage, Christina's faith seemed to have paid off.
They both had jobs, and they had a nice little house in Clearwater. It was a great place to raise their kids. From the outside looking in, they were just one big happy family.
Christina Ladrini had such a huge heart. She was a patient care technician. Her whole mission was to take care of her family. So in order to do that, she was willing to work as hard as she possibly could.
Over time, Christina even managed to put aside enough for her husband, Vincent, to start his own business.
Christina's husband kind of had big dreams. He didn't want to work for anybody else. He'd had aquariums in his house and thought he could run a business. So Christina had opened a business for him. He was gung-ho putting it together, but when it came down to the work, he didn't show up. So it was 6 months and the business went under.
With 5 kids under 18 and their resources running out, it fell on Christina to find a way to make ends meet.
She was pretty much the one who was bringing in all the money. So they were relying on her to pay for everything.
Christina was determined not to let this affect her children, But a patient care salary was simply not enough to live on. And so when she was offered an opportunity to make a lot more money, she took it without asking many questions.
The job turned out to be managing a store where the girls provided a variety of different services. In the front, they sold lingerie, aromatherapy candles, and stuff like that. In the back was used for lingerie modeling.
It wasn't Christina's dream job by any stretch of the imagination, but it was legal, it paid well, and she didn't have to entertain any clients.
It wasn't long before Christina's financial difficulties were over.
We're talking about a considerable amount of money. And no matter how strange the job may be, that's hard to say no to. After a year or so, she worked her way up.
She made more than enough to provide for her family, and in fact, she was able to actually start putting money aside again. But this time, Christina decided to invest in herself. She opened up a lingerie shop with one of her friends named Marcy.
Christina had to think about her children's futures, and she probably wasn't going to be able to put 5 kids through college working for someone else. Starting a business seemed like the next logical step.
There were already some similar businesses in the area, but Christina was convinced that the area could support one more. So when they saw a vacancy on Ulmerton Road, they wasted no time signing a lease.
But this new business venture would also run into trouble. Just 10 days after the grand opening, someone had broken into Christina's business and shot her husband's minivan full of holes, and police want to know why.
The 2 crimes occurred like an hour apart. Nothing stolen, just property damage. It looked like someone might be trying to send Christina a message.
Coming up, a disturbing phone call points investigators toward 2 possible suspects.
They were alleged to have serious problems with drugs, and plenty of people have seen at least one of them carrying a gun.
Florida police are investigating a pair of crimes against Christina Lodrini and her family. A break-in at her business in Largo, and shots fired outside their home in nearby Clearwater.
Investigators from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office were at the couple's home getting statements. Vincent and his neighbors reported hearing 4 or 5 gunshots, but it appeared that the only damage was to the minivan.
The front windshield was cracked in 3 places. 2 of the passenger side windows and the driver's side windows were shot out. And there was a bullet hole in the left rear quarter panel of the vehicle.
Thank God nobody got hit, nobody got shot, nobody got hurt.
A forensics team carefully inspects the area, but no shell casings or any other evidence can be found.
The first thing detectives are going to ask, do you have any enemies? Can you think of anybody that might want to hurt you?
Vincent couldn't think of anyone who would want to harm himself or his family.
He managed to catch a glimpse of the vehicle. However, Vincent said that after he heard the shots, he ran outside and saw a silver or gray SUV driving with no lights on. Unfortunately, it was too dark for him to get a license plate.
While Christina waits for her business partner to arrive, detectives start investigating the break-in scene.
The window had been shattered there as well, but there didn't appear to be any bullet holes. And there were no reports of gunfire in the area, so it was possible that it was unrelated. And they were looking for 2 different sets of suspects.
You might think attempted robbery, but when they walk Christina through the scene, there's nothing missing. That makes it look more like an act of vandalism.
Christina says she has no idea who had vandalized the shop. No angry customers, nor disgruntled employees. So maybe it's a group of teenagers or someone making trouble.
Unfortunately, police couldn't get any fingerprints from either the shattered glass or the front door.
While investigators finish their walkthrough with Christina, uniformed officers take a statement from the man who called in the report.
He had been washing his clothes at the 24-hour laundromat next to Christina's business. He said he was in his car waiting for the clothes to dry when he heard the sound of breaking glass. So he took cover and called police.
Unfortunately, that means he didn't see who did it, and he didn't see anyone leaving the scene at the time of the crime.
They hadn't found any leads at home nor at the store. And while police weren't sure if the two crimes had anything to do with one another, if you're Christina, you gotta be pretty shaken up at that point.
When her business partner arrives, Christina returns home to care for her family. But as they try to recover, Christina receives an ominous phone call.
It was almost 6 a.m. at that point, and she just got finished talking to police. So she let it go to voicemail.
The voice wasn't one that she recognized, and in fact, she couldn't even tell if the voice were male or female. But the message they left was disturbing. They said they were representing their clients and that next time there would not be warning shots.
Christina immediately notifies police, and officers are sent to watch over the family.
She's terrified. She has no idea what "my client" means. That's something a lawyer would say, and that's obviously not the case here.
Whoever it was, they made it clear that these were targeted attacks. They shot up the family minivan, which could be taken as a threat to hurt her kids if she didn't do what they wanted. The problem was, they didn't say what they wanted, so there's nothing that she can do to stop it from happening again.
The panic, the fear, life as you knew it is no longer the same.
Detectives began interviewing Christina's employees and business associates, hoping to find a lead. They quickly come up with the names of 2 possible suspects.
One of the employees tells police that she and Christina used to work at a shop nearby owned by a woman named Kristen. She claims that Kristen and her boyfriend Donald were heavy drug users, and Donald often carried a gun.
Kristen apparently had a reputation for threatening former employees when they found work elsewhere, so Christina starting a rival business could clearly have set her off.
Christina's business partner, Marcy, even told detectives that she thought it might be Donald's voice on their threatening message.
Investigators traced the phone call, but unfortunately, the number is not registered to Donald or Kristen.
It's one of those pay-as-you-go accounts. What police call a burner phone. Anyone could set one up with any name they choose. So that turned out to be a dead end.
However, police find a possible connection. A witness places Donald and Kristen at the scene just a couple blocks from the shooting.
A convenience store clerk recognized 2 people matching the couple's description hanging around the store. They were in a 4-door truck with a broken back window.
Could this be the vehicle Christina's husband saw speeding away from their house after the shooting?
Christina told police that Donald and Kristen didn't live anywhere near her, so it was very suspicious they were there around the time of the shooting.
Detectives recommended that she activate the security cameras at her shop and install cameras outside the house as well. If they catch anyone lurking around, it'll help establish a pattern of harassment when it comes time to press charges.
Christina takes investigators' advice and installs the cameras. But no one could have anticipated what they would record. Coming up, more shots are fired, and this time, the consequences could be devastating.
Those bullets went through, hit a mirror above the baby's bed.
The morning after the attacks on Christina Lodrini's home and business, detectives in Largo, Florida have come up with a pair of possible suspects. 2 rival business owners named Kristen and Donald.
Christina kind of stepped on their toes by opening a competing store, so clearly they were persons of interest in this case.
There was no direct evidence yet linking the couple to the shooting. Since the voicemail that Christina received had threatened further harm, police were taking it very seriously, and so was she.
The lead detective, he tells her to go get a surveillance camera. So she heads to her local Walmart, invests $25 into a camera for her home.
In the meantime, investigators are searching for their suspects, but so far, it looks like the pair are trying to avoid them.
They reached out to everyone who knew these 2. Family, friends, neighbors, former employees. There's no way they didn't know police wanted to speak to them, but they still didn't surface. If they were innocent, you would think they'd want to come in and clear up any confusion.
Weeks pass, and thankfully, Christina and her family come under no further attacks.
Life sort of returned to normal, both at work and at home. The summer was winding down, and the kids were going back to school, and despite a rocky start, her business was actually doing pretty well.
It seemed like whoever threatened her might have gone away or given up, but investigators were still working the case.
A month and a half later, on August 24th, Donald and Kristen finally show up in a Pinellas County courthouse.
Turns out, they've been summoned on completely different charges, but investigators instantly recognized their names and brought them in for questioning.
They both lawyered up and would not talk. That certainly looked like they had something to hide, but without concrete evidence, police couldn't charge them with anything.
At that point, the investigation had basically hit a roadblock. The upshot is the danger to Christina and her family seems to be over.
But in the early morning hours of September 7th, police get another urgent call from Christina.
911, what is your emergency?
I just had shots fired into my house.
At what address, ma'am? Does anybody need a paramedic?
No, we don't, but I do need,
Let me put you right on the phone with the sheriff's office.
What Christina describes is completely terrifying. The previous gunshots were aimed at a vehicle. This time, whoever it was fired 6 shots directly into the Ladrini home, with 8 people asleep inside.
You have a home here now that's riddled with bullets. You have bullets actually lodged in the wall. You have a TV damaged. You have windows shattered. And you have even an 11-month-old baby grazed by some of that glass.
Those bullets hit a mirror above the baby's bed where glass fell into the baby's bed. To hear those rounds being fired and hearing glass break in your residence in the early mornings, got to be bone-chilling.
If the guns pointed a little bit lower or a little bit higher or a little bit more to the left or a little bit more to the right, this could have gone so much worse and would have been a real tragedy.
It seems that whoever threatened Christina and her family wasn't finished after all. But this time, investigators are hopeful that the suspect has been caught on tape.
Christina verified that the security cameras that she installed outside of her home were working. So they rolled back the footage to the time of the attack.
Thankfully, the coverage of the camera provided a pretty good look at the shooter. It appeared to be a woman in her late 20s, early 30s, and the way it goes down is extremely alarming to police.
It was chilling. You saw a vehicle pull up and stop. You saw a person get out, moving in a very particular way. Her gait, the person's movement, was noticeable. And then you saw that person pull out a weapon and start firing. And it's jarring because you don't see something like that often, thank God.
The way she's aiming and firing the gun. Officers know it all too well. Something clicks in their mind that this must be someone who's trained in law enforcement.
But that's not the only surprise.
The video is grainy. You may not be able to see the woman's face, but her walk is unmistakable. And it's a walk that Christina knows all too well. It's one of her closest, dearest friends.
Christina identifies the shooter as 30-year-old Courtney Savage, her best friend and former business partner.
The images shook her to the core. Why would Courtney have such animosity towards her?
They apparently spoke on the phone nearly every day. You'd think if your best friend had a problem with you, they'd tell you what it was before they started shooting.
Coming up, an officer of the law becomes a woman out for revenge.
She was angry, and she didn't deal with that anger very well.
Christina Ladrini and her family have once again been the target of a terrifying attack. And what's even more frightening is the identity of the shooter.
This isn't some stranger with a grudge. Courtney Savage is one of her closest friends. And not only that, it turns out she's a former police officer.
Courtney wanted to be in law enforcement since she was a teen, so she trained for it. And that's where she met her husband as he was going to be a police officer also.
I started dating my husband at the time when we were in the Corrections Academy, and we ended up getting married in March of '99.
After they graduated from the academy, they both got jobs working at Florida prisons.
I was hired as a correctional officer for Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department. Worked there for a little while, but I wanted to, go onto the law enforcement side. So I got a position as a reserve officer for Tampa Police Department.
However, Courtney quickly discovered the job wasn't all she hoped it would be.
She was not making much money. I think she was making $8 an hour. And it was very difficult.
You're right on the streets with them. You're in full uniform and you're, doing everything a regular police officer would do. The only thing is that you are part-time. It was stressful.
She saw ads in the paper for lingerie modeling. So she looked into it, and there was really very little that I could do to change her mind.
Soon, Courtney was earning more as a model than she could have ever imagined.
We wanted to take vacations, if we wanted to, whatever we wanted to do, we had the money for, which was a help. And it was good for a while.
Courtney eventually decided to go into business for herself.
What was the point in working for other people that she could do the same thing? She could own the shop. So she went around, looked for a place to rent. She found one. She stocked it. She hired people to help her.
One of the people Courtney hired was Christina Lodrini.
She was reliable and responsible, kind of someone you can always call, you can count on. I automatically said, I want her to come work for me.
They worked well together, and as they got to know each other, they became close friends.
So in 2005, when health problems left Courtney bedridden, she turned to Christina for help.
Courtney was ill due to heavy metal poisoning from dental work she received.
She went to Mexico to have her teeth done. Unfortunately, the products that they use for the teeth down there have a lot of mercury and other chemicals in them.
I started having grand mal seizures. I had pain all over. It was terrible. High fevers. It was bad. I was on a lot of seizure medicine. I was on a lot of antidepressants, sleeping medicine, sedatives, everything you can think of. I had a laundry list of pharmaceuticals I had to take every day.
So she was in no condition, emotionally, physically, mentally, to be at a business, let alone run it. So, she took a couple of months off. She entrusted the business to someone she considered a friend.
I knew Christina for 9 years. She was my best friend. I thought I could rely on her.
Christina tells detectives that she kept the shop running as long as she could, but she ran into an unforeseen problem.
She approached the landlord to renew her lease, but the landlord told her he was actually going to give it to the bar owner next door so he could expand his business.
That was not the kind of problem she expected to deal with when she agreed to help out, but Courtney was in no place to handle it, so she had to do something.
But Christina wasn't going to stop there. She made a vow to her friend. She actually begged the landlord to please reconsider. She even offered to double the rent, but the landlord simply would not budge.
Christina says she was forced to clean out Courtney's shop and made arrangements to return the unsold merchandise.
It wasn't her fault, but I'm sure she still felt terrible about it.
In Christina's eyes, they parted amicably. She thought that her friend knew that she did everything that she could to save the business, and these circumstances were out of control.
It's definitely the type of thing that can cause bad blood between friends, but this had happened more than a year ago. So if Courtney held a grudge, you would think she would have done something about it before now.
Christina has identified Courtney as the shooter captured on tape, but the footage is too grainy to guarantee a conviction. So investigators ask Christina to help them obtain more evidence.
Detective Lewis had Christina make a controlled phone call to Courtney, asking her strategic questions about the shooting of the residents and her involvement.
She called me and accused me, oh, did you shoot up my house? And I said, are you crazy or something? I don't know, something like that.
However, it quickly becomes clear that Courtney still blames Christina for what happened to her business.
Courtney denies at first that she had anything to do with the shooting. But after further pressing, Courtney admits that she was very angry at Christina, felt that she drove the business into the ground.
I would call the shop and nobody would answer. And I thought, what are they doing? Then my landlord, he told me the story that she hadn't paid any rent, that he had put a formal eviction on her door.
Christina denies the landlord's allegations, but the more they discuss it, the angrier Courtney becomes.
The motivating factor was revenge. She felt manipulated, taken advantage of.
Tina had ruined her business, had lied to her, had betrayed her.
When Christina finally asks Courtney what she can do to end the attacks, investigators get the closest thing they've heard to a confession.
She offered me a figure, like $2,000 or something, and asked, well, will it stop? And I said, well, that's a start.
They agreed to meet at a diner in Clearwater at 10 p.m. Christina tells Courtney she'll bring the money in cash, but police are there waiting for her.
Coming up, Courtney's arrest takes an unexpected turn.
She lunged for a weapon that was in the glove box.
Less than 24 hours after security cameras caught former police officer Courtney Savage firing a gun into Christina Ladrini's house, detectives are getting ready to arrest her.
The trap has been laid because Christina is able to convince Courtney to meet her so she could give her $2,500 that Courtney feels that she is owed.
Officers follow Courtney to the diner where they spring the trap. But the arrest doesn't exactly go according to plan.
Because of Courtney's training, the police knew that they had to move very quickly. They could not give Courtney the upper hand.
My doors automatically unlock my truck, and I see this person coming up alongside of my truck, just like slithering alongside of my truck, and rips my door open. And in one fluid movement, he grabbed me from the seat to the ground, and started tasing me.
It was conveyed to me that she lunged for a weapon that was in the glove box and had to be tased.
Never said, this is a please get out, nothing. It was open my door and snatch at me. So of course my reaction is going to be like, what do you know, there was no time to resist. I didn't know what was going on.
Back at the station, detectives give Courtney a chance to explain herself.
When a suspect is taken into custody, a lot of times they shut down. They don't say anything. But Courtney surprises everybody. She's willing to talk.
Well, I'm a honest person, you know, and I figured it would be easy for me if I just, you know, told the truth. Yeah, I did it, you know. I shot into a house. I mean, I was the type of a law enforcement officer that if you were straight with me, I was going to go easy on you. That's the way I was, and I just assumed that was the best route to go.
Courtney goes into great detail on why she did it. She claimed that Christina owed $2,500 in unsold merchandise that was never returned to her and $15,000 worth of other business equipment that went missing when the shop was under Christina's supervision. She felt completely betrayed.
But instead of confronting her friend, Courtney had let her anger fester for almost a year.
A few months after Courtney recovered from all of her health problems, she discovered Christina was about to open another business with a different friend. This set her over the edge.
She told me that she was very, very angry at Tina, wanted to get back at her, wanted to get revenge.
This is a bizarre case because when people want revenge, they usually want it right away. Courtney Savage acted out over a 90-day period.
According to Courtney, the first attack was intended to put Christina out of business.
Courtney said she hoped that Christina's landlord would revoke her lease. If she was attracting that kind of trouble, maybe they would have evicted her.
And Courtney used a voice-disguising device to leave Christina threatening voicemails.
When that didn't work, things sort of escalated from there. Christina hadn't responded to the voicemail threats, so she decided to go over there in the middle of the night to vent her frustrations.
I just lost it and went over there and just, I was trying to scare her,
Despite narrowly avoiding any casualties, Courtney insists that she never meant to harm anyone.
I'm a master marksman. The reason I got out of the truck was to make sure that my bullets just didn't fly everywhere. I wanted to make sure that I was, aiming to a point where I could see where my bullets were going.
She said she was the one driving the SUV that Christina's husband saw leaving the scene. There were no accomplices. The SUV was a rental, so she wouldn't be recognized.
I didn't want to use my vehicle, And plus, the vehicle was also my husband's truck, so I didn't want him to get in trouble or anything.
She even tells investigators where to find the gun she used.
Courtney says the Glock isn't the one they're looking for. She actually used the .357, which she got rid of afterwards.
Courtney had hidden the gun in my mother's mobile home shed down in Clearwater.
She filled out a written statement confessing to all of her actions. As far as she was concerned, that would be the end of it. She would just get probation.
I cooperated with the detectives. I was originally charged with shooting into an occupied dwelling, and I'd never been arrested before, and I didn't foresee any major problems from it.
It's the first clue that investigators have that she feels she did nothing wrong.
Had the mercury poisoning from her botched dental work affected Courtney's judgment?
It definitely was not in my normal state of mind. When you chew food or when you drink something hot, the heavy metal releases a vapor and it goes up into your brain. And what they used to call that was Mad Hatter syndrome.
If Courtney was expecting a slap on the wrist, she is sorely mistaken.
They sent me over to the jail side. I tried to arrange bond right away. And then I couldn't arrange bond because they pulled back the shooting to an occupied dwelling charge and started amending it.
The allegations were very serious, and it happened on more than one occasion, so the state attorney's office would be coming hard at Courtney.
Coming up, a routine hearing turns into a nationwide manhunt.
Had a whole new identity.
She was considered a fugitive of justice.
Courtney Savage has confessed to firing 6 bullets into the home of her best friend, Christina Ladrini, as payback for letting her business fall into ruin.
I knew I'd never get any money back. I knew I'd never have my business back. I just wanted her to admit that she betrayed me.
Despite the fact that no one was injured, there is a lot for prosecutors to consider when weighing the charges. The fact that Courtney seemed to believe that what she did wasn't that big of a deal certainly didn't help.
The charges against Courtney are increased to include 8 counts of attempted murder.
The district attorney at the time threatened Courtney with 7 life sentences. We were terrified.
At that time, her and her husband were going through a divorce. The divorce was finalized, and she obtained some money from the divorce, which allowed her to post a bond.
Courtney's preliminary hearing is set for July 20th, 2007, but she never shows up.
When she found out that they were changing the charges, she made up her mind to go on the run. She went on the lam in Mexico to have plastic surgery to alter her profile.
I, packed some bags and left everything behind. I had a brow lift, an eye job, nose job, chin contour, had a whole new identity, clean identity I purchased.
The court immediately issues a warrant for her arrest, and the manhunt begins.
She was considered a fugitive of justice. Detective Lewis did an excellent job and did everything that any seasoned investigator would have done. He tracked down old friends, interviewed the mom, and even tracked her up to New Jersey, where she was from, finding old acquaintances.
But despite their best efforts, Courtney manages to elude police for over a year. And with her new appearance, she returned to the U.S. undetected.
I'd laid low for a while in Oklahoma. I figured, what's a great place to blend in? I didn't use any credit. I had worked 2 different bartending jobs, actually, and they both paid under the table. I was in Oklahoma for about 5.5 months.
Florida police weren't making any headway, so they eventually chose to enlist the help of the media.
It was posted in the Tampa paper that I was going to be on America's Most Wanted.
The episode featuring Courtney airs on September 20th, 2008, 2 years after the initial shooting.
It was very upsetting. I wanted to turn away, but I had to watch it. I had to. It was the first time I had seen the video of her shooting into Tina's house, and it was just anger and sadness and hopelessness. Hopelessness, because you don't know what you can do to get your child out of this terrible predicament.
2 days later, a viewer calls the tip line with her location.
I had a really, really bad feeling that day, just horrible feeling. And I saw this man watching me. So I ran around the corner and I started to call my boyfriend at work. And as I was walking around the corner, here comes 2 patrol units. And I knew they were for me.
Surveillance deputies identified her. The team leader made a decision to approach, and they arrested her and took her into custody.
This time, Courtney doesn't resist. She is quickly extradited back to Florida.
She had to face the original charges that she was facing when she left. The state attorney's office added yet another charge for failing to appear in court. Her maximum exposure was, again, more than 100 years in jail.
She still had the option of taking her case to trial, but with that much evidence against her, she had very little chance of winning.
We started offering different pleas, and they kept rejecting them. Then eventually they came back with 20 and 10 or go to trial.
It was the best she could have expected given the serious nature of these charges.
On April 15th, 2009, Courtney Savage pleads guilty to all charges. She is sentenced to 20 years in prison.
For Christina, you can imagine that justice is finally being served. It's finally closure for the victim's family and closure for police, too.
It was a terrible crime, but I thought the sentence was a bit much. You lock someone up, throw them away, and you don't give them any kind of counseling.
In my heart of hearts, I really believe that if she had stayed and she didn't run, she would have gotten a much better sentence than she ended up with.
What started out as best friends involved in a business had ultimately ended with an act of betrayal.
It was a terrible thing that had happened, and what a shame that 2 friends would end up this way. Horrific sadness.
Would tell Christina, I'm sorry it had to happen that way. I feel like there were, things that were done to me that kind of pushed me over the edge. With the problems I was having mentally and with my health problems, I feel like I would never have done this in a normal situation.
There's certain professions that you hold at a higher standard. A police officer shooting into a home with children inside and then claiming she didn't hurt anybody, so she should be on probation. Unbelievable.